Race First and Self-Reliance, Chapter 2. In a world of wolves, one should go armed, and one of the most powerful defensive weapons within the reach of Negroes is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. Marcus Garvey. What we believe. The Universal Negro Improvement Association advocates the unity and blending of all Negroes into one strong, healthy race. It is against miscegenation and race suicide. It believes that the Negro race is as good as any other, and therefore should be as proud of itself as others are. It believes in the purity of the Negro race and the purity of the white race. It is against rich blacks marrying poor whites. It is against rich or poor whites taking advantage of Negro women. It believes in the spiritual fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, unlike his major rivals in the United States, built a mass organization that went beyond mere civil rights agitation and protest and based itself upon a definite, well-thought-out program that he believed would lead to the total emancipation of the race from white domination. Central to the ideological basis underpinning Garvey's program was the question of race. For Garvey, the black man was universally oppressed on racial grounds, and any program of emancipation would have to be built around the question of race first. The race became a political entity which would have to be redeemed. Against the rival suggestion that humanity and not the black race should be the objects of his zeal, he argued that it was not humanity that was lynched, burned, Jim Crowed, and segregated, but black people. The primacy of race characterized the UNIA from its beginnings in Jamaica, and by 1919, United States government officials were drawing attention to what they considered the subversive doctrine. Garvey went about the task of converting the disabilities of race into a positive tool of liberation with a thorough aggressiveness. No man can convince me contrary to my belief, he declared, because my belief is founded upon a hard and horrible experience, not a personal experience, but a racial experience. The world has made being black a crime, and I have felt it in common with men who suffer like me, and pardon me, instead of making it a crime, I hope to make it a virtue. Accordingly, the consciousness of Garvey's followers was saturated with the new doctrine. Black dolls were manufactured for black children. Garvey's newspaper proclaimed itself the Negro World. He encouraged his followers to support their black businessmen and professionals. The race catechism used by his followers disabused the minds of black folk concerning the claims of the Hamitic myth by explaining that, contrary to this myth, black people were certainly not the recipients of any biblical curse. He frowned upon advertisements of racially demeaning nature. The Negro World sponsored beauty contests and published photographs of beautiful black women, a subject on which Garvey waxed poetic. Black queen of beauty, thou hast given color to the world. Indeed, practically every aspect of the organization was designed to bolster the black man's self-esteem and to foster pride in self. The primacy of race in Garvey's thought was coupled with a deep pessimism concerning the future of the black man in America. He believed that the black man, with increasingly ample educational opportunities, would aspire to positions of influence which would bring him into direct competition with the white power structure. Within 50 to 100 years, he predicted, such confrontation would lead to a racial clash which would end disastrously for the black race. Pardon me. Pardon me. This analysis led Garvey inevitably in the direction of racial separation. His economic ventures in the United States amounted to an attempt toward a nucleus of black a self-sustaining black race in America, but his gaze looked more longingly toward Africa as the salvation of the African abroad. Even in Africa, though, he found the European overlords attempting to increase the seeds of future racial discord, as in 1938 when he protested British consideration of a proposal to resettle European Jews in Tanganyika, 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 Kenya, or British Guiana, Guiana. Garvey's concern over the salvation of the race led him to harsh criticism of any weaknesses he perceived among black people. and there was nothing that displeased him more than a black man who did not think in racial terms. Such criticism brought the finest of his incentive. Yes, this is an Uncle Tom Negro. Yes, a yes boss Negro. A howdy massa Negro. A yes mass Charlie Negro. A Negro who will be satisfied to blacken a white man's shoes all the days of his life and lick the white man's spittle if he orders him to do so. Garvey's race-first doctrine found excellent expression in his acute awareness of the role of culture as a tool for liberation. He himself was a prolific poet of liberation. Indeed, his poems are as good a source of his ideology as any. They were replete with such themes as the beauty of the black woman, the need for self-reliance, the glories of African history, the necessity for an end to black participation in white wars, and protests at the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. This experimentation with the arts for purposes of politicizing the UNIA membership was also indulged in by one of Garvey's closest associates, John Edward Bruce. One Bruce play, pardon me, one Bruce play, Preaching versus Practice, expressed Garvey's hostility toward unscrupulous black preachers. Another, which one provided an excellent example of the use of this medium for political education. The main characters were a Senebundo Ajay, Sennebundo Ajai, an African UNIA diplomat, and three young ladies, one each from Martinique, the British West Indies, and Afro-American, all of whom were in love with the hero who was leaving for Nigeria on UNIA organizational business. And between the romantic escapades, the audience was treated to monologues extolling the virtues of the UNIA. The set was liberally decorated with red, black, and green of the UNIA, and the hero and the lady of his choice eventually announced their intention to be married in Liberty Hall in Africa. Garvey himself indulged in political playwriting. His The Coronation of the African King was performed at his Edelweiss Park headquarters in Jamaica in 1930. The three-act play included scenes in New York, Washington, Paris, London, the West Indies, Ashanti, Dahomey, Senegal, and the Sudan. One scene showed the French Premier and British Prime Minister David Lloyd George conferring over UNIA penetration into Africa. Another featured black voices delivering sturdy oratory against a backdrop of African freedom fighters engaged in bloody struggle with French usurpers in the Sudan, excuse me. The whole play was conceived as a dramatization of the results of UNIA propaganda since 1918. Such cultural activity was widely indulged in throughout the UNIA. The Dominican division had a literary club. The Black Cross Nurses in Norfolk, Virginia in 1922 staged an African Convention, a play which was full of race pride and was staged to enthuse the public on the aims of the UNIA and ACL. In Newport News, Virginia, at about the same time, the juvenile Black Cross Nurses and Boy Scouts put on a short play, Coming Home to Africa. In New York, the UNIA Dramatic Club performed the great race drama, Talable, designed to interpret the ideas of the Great Association. The Philadelphia division sponsored The New Negro, described as a genuine Negro melodrama. The Negro World commented on the play. The old Uncle Tom type is shown as a servant of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, while the new Negro stands up man to man and the son of Marcus Garvey and demands an equal break with other races. Garvey's heyday in the 1920s coincided with the Garvey's heyday in the 1920s coincided with the Afro-American literary efflorescence known as the Harlem Renaissance, for the race and African consciousness of which Garvey gave himself was in no small way responsible. Indeed, some of the most important artists of the Renaissance were associated with the UNIA. Claude McKay was a Garvey supporter and a regular contributor to the Negro World in its early period. Eric Walren was a Negro World editor, and Zora Neale Hurston was a columnist for the paper. Negro World readers were treated to excellent book reviews by editors William H. Ferris, Eric Walren, and Hubert H. Harrison. Yet Garvey could not uncritically accept the exoticism and exaggerated negritude which sometimes characterized writers of the period. He accordingly joined in the chorus of criticism against Claude McKay's Home to Harlem. Writing from France, he disapproved strenuously of black writers who were prostituting their language under the direction of the white man to bring out and show up the worst traits of our people. He considered McKay's book a damnable libel against the Negro and postulated his conception of the type of artist the race needed. We must encourage our own black authors who have character, who are loyal to their race, who feel proud to be black, and in every way let them feel that we appreciate their efforts to advance our race through healthy and decent literature. The Negro World, in a similar vein, took County Cullen, another luminary of the Harlem Renaissance, to task. The paper deplored the fact that a Harvard graduate could overdo the negritude idea to the extent of writing. Not yet has my heart or head in the least way realized it, and I are civilized. During UNIA international conventions in New York and Jamaica, a literary censor was recommended who would safeguard black people from material unfavorable to the race. During the latter half of the 1930s, Garvey increasingly focused his attention on Paul Robeson, the leading black motion picture actor of the period. Garvey paid due homage to Robeson's artistic ability, but did not like the spectacle of the foremost black dramatic personality of the age being cast in a series of roles calculated to demean black folk. Robeson was reported in 1929 to be the projected star of a satire on Garvey's career written by two authors, Wallace Thurman and Willard Rapp, known for their sensationalism of Harlem's senior side. Whether this had anything to do with Garvey's attitude is unclear. The play was to be titled Jeremiah the Great. At any rate, 1935 found Garvey denouncing Robeson's appearances in such well-known stage and motion picture productions as Emperor Jones, Sanders of the River, and Stevedore. Readers of Garvey's Black Man magazine were informed that Paul Robeson, the Negro actor, has left London for Hollywood. He is going there to make another slanderous picture against the Negro. The point was made that in days gone by, any black man who succeeded in white circles was automatically lionized. That day should be no more. The hope was expressed that Robeson was now making sufficient money so that when he retires from the stage he may be able to square his conscience with his race by doing something good for it. In 1937, Garvey protested the British Broadcasting Corporation against anti-black programs and to the British Moving Picture Board against Robeson's films, while in 1939, 1 year before his death, he actually published a critical pamphlet aimed at Robeson's films. Robeson withdrew from Hollywood the same year for the same reasons contained in Garvey's criticisms. Garvey's concern with the racial implications of culture embraced also vaudeville. The UNIA owned two folly companies in Jamaica, various UNIA choirs and bands, such as Universal Jazz Hounds of the Jamaica UNIA, and sports, where Garvey expressed keen interest in the wider implications of the Joe Louis vs. Max Schmeling bouts of the late 1930s. Outstanding black talent in any field is always welcome at Liberty Hall. Women's Day at the 1922 convention featured Marian Anderson of Philadelphia, billed as America's greatest contralto soloist. Garvey's doctrine of race first was severely tested by the presence within the race of large numbers of persons of mixed African and Caucasian origin. He took the position that there is more bitterness among us Negroes because of the cast of color than there is between any other peoples, not excluding the people of India. He even asserted that prejudice within the race probably exceeded that directed against the race by alien races. This position brought Garvey into serious ideological conflict with middle-class leaders in the United States and the West Indies, many of whom were themselves of a lighter hue. Such opposition was particularly hostile in the United States, where integrationalist leaders such as W.E.B. Du Bois argued that this problem either did not exist or was relatively minor in the United States, and that Garvey, because of his West Indian background, was erroneously importing this feature of island society into an Afro-American scene that he did not understand. Garvey had indeed come out of a West Indian society stultified by an exaggerated three-tiered system of white, brown, black social stratification, and he himself regularly discussed the problem from at least as early as 1913. His Jamaican daily, The Black Man, editorialized in 1921. Some people are afraid, some annoyed, and others disgusted that we are, as they say, raised the color question. The question has long been raised and put into vindictive operation. The color question is the one and the only reason that we cannot find a black girl or boy in store or office in the city, when to our certain knowledge intelligent ones among them have been refused at places filled with half illiterate brown and mulatto girls and boys affecting the attitude of superiors and behavior. There is going to be fair play in this country yet. The black man is on the job and soon will blacken some of these stores and offices beyond recognition. As the editorial suggests, even in Jamaica, where the color caste distinctions were acute, the tendency of the brown class was to deny its existence, much as Du Bois and the Afro-American integrationists did, much as Du Bois and the Afro-American, pardon me, integrationists did. But Garvey was relentless in his attempts to bring the issue to the surface. This hypocritical cry of peace, peace, when there is no peace, is ruinous to the peace and harmony of society, he declared. We deny the existence of a condition that is woven into the warp and woof of the fabric of our social and public life. We refuse to admit the presence of a feature in our national life, the inescapable results of whose insidious workings cause delay, irritation, and annoyance. We rave against, we forbid, we threaten those who dare to refer to the evident, the patent facts, and their glaring results. While the whole land is leavened and permeated with evils of color distinction, and we cry out for harmony and peace. We are, to use a vulgar phrase, a bunch of cheats. We are dishonest, immoral, liars, hypocrites. This type of assault on entrenched privilege brought Garvey a death threat from a self-styled Jamaican secret society of colored men, which considered him a black swine. In Afro-America, too, Garvey observed a presence among employers for light-skinned people as clerks, waitresses, etc., and newspapers full of advertisements for skin whiteness, often couched the crudest possible language. Added to this, he discovered in New York, Boston, Washington, and Detroit the Blue Vein Society and the Colonial Club. The West Indian Lights formed the Colonial Club, and the American Lights the Blue Vein Society. These attitudes extended into the churches. It would appear then that Garvey, as one of his supporters pointed out, did not appeal to intra-race color prejudice in the United States, but rather revealed it. Despite the similarities, of course, the situation in America, where the majority did not support of the buffer mulatto element to the same extent as the white minority in the islands, was not as serious as in the West Indies. Garvey was fully aware of this. The situation in America was serious enough to warrant exposure and attack, but in the West Indies, it more nearly approximated a rigid caste structure. Garvey himself pinpointed this difference better than any of his critics. In the term Negro, we include all those persons whom the American white man includes in this appellation of his contempt and hate. The contents of the term are much reduced in Jamaica and the West Indies, but it carries no less of reprobation against the persons. The great curse of our Jamaican communal life is the failure of the hybrid population to realize their natural and correct identification. So whereas the UNIA in the United States numbered among its ranks people of all colors, excluding whites, and business and professional people, in addition to the great mass of workers and peanut and peasants. In Jamaica, it was largely confined to the humbler sections of humanity. This led Garvey to surmise that God seems to save from the bottom upwards. Garvey's experience with the light-skinned element, both in the West Indies and in America, led him to be hostile toward those who seemed to portray the supercilious attitudes he abhorred. It led him also to consider miscegenation to be an evil which should not be perpetuated. We are conscious of the fact that slavery brought upon us the curse of many colors within our race. That is no reason why we of ourselves should perpetuate the evil. The doctrine of race first had various implications for Garvey's attitude towards white people. It meant, first of all, the exclusion of white people from membership in the UNIA and affiliated organizations. Whites were also prevented from holding shares in Garvey's economic undertakings. His desire to build racial self-reliance led logically to the rejection of white financial philanthropy. In reply to a suggestion by a white reporter in 1921 that certain Negro files might in Massachusetts might be prevailed upon to contribute to the UNIA, Garvey replied, "We do not want their money. This is a black man's movement." Race first meant, however, not only race first for black people, but for other races as well. As far as Garvey was concerned, white people of whatever political persuasion put race before all other considerations. Accordingly, he often preferred an honest expression of racism to the possibly transparent smiles of the philanthropist. He looked at the honest expression of racism as a blessing in disguise because it forced the black man into a heightened racial consciousness, whereas the camouflage variety could lull him into a sense of false security. Commenting in 1917 on the great strides Afro-Americans had made in independent racial endeavor, he wrote, "The honest prejudice of the South was sufficiently evident to give the Negro of America the real start, to start with a race consciousness which I am convinced is responsible for the state of development already reached by the race. Thus, he could say, we have to admire the white man who fixed the Bible to suit himself and who even fixed tradition itself, telling us that everything worthwhile and beautiful was made by the white man, and that God is a great white man, that Jesus was a white man, and that the angels, etc., whatever they are, as beautiful as peaches in Georgia." By the same token, however, he saw white self-interest as largely detrimental to black self-interest, and within the confines of a country such as the United States, where whites formed a large ruling majority, white racial self-interest would tend inexorably toward the extermination of the black minority. These considerations strengthened Garvey's commitment to a racial separation. Despite the fact that Garvey would not accept white philanthropy or allow whites to join his organization, it did not follow that he could not work to a limited extent with white people. In fact, by maintaining an independent black power base, he had more freedom to work with or support widely differing types of white persons and organizations with specific projects or for limited objectives than some of his contemporaries who were straitjacketed in interracial organizations. The first category of white people with whom Garvey could cooperate were certain types of radicals, usually those engaged in anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, or anti-racist struggles. Often they were leaders of mass movements like his own, and he could identify them as kindred spirits. Among persons in this category were Eamon, Eamon, de Valera, the Irish leader, who on one occasion was listed as a featured speaker at Garvey's Harlem Liberty Hall, and the Russian revolutionaries Lenin and Trotsky. He often had a good word for historical figures such as John Brown, Elijah Lovejoy, and others of abolitionist inclination. He also had a great admiration for Captain A. Cipriani, white leader of the Trinidad Working Men's Association, (TWA), whose public career largely coincided with Garvey's in time and political outlook. Cipriani had become head of the TWA in 1919 at the invitation, or TWA, of the members, who were black. By this time, the association had already become a Garveyite stronghold in Trinidad, and its struggles were being reported in the Negro Board. Many of its meetings were held in Port of Spain's Liberty Hall, and its second in command, W. Howard Bishop, as well as other members of his hierarchy, were prominent Garveyites. Garvey corresponded with Cipriani, who made representations to the British government in 1937 to change their intention of barring Garvey from entry into the island. Another well-known white radical for whom Garvey seems to have had some respect was Nancy Kennard, renegade member of a wealthy shipping family who became involved in a variety of black causes. In 1932, Kennard visited Jamaica to gather material for her Negro anthology and was the guest at a reception arranged by Garvey. If Garvey could associate with some radical whites of the left in deference to their anti-imperialist stance or reputation as leaders of the masses, he could also associate, for different reasons, with segregationists on the far right. These latter shared one very crucial ideological tenet with Garvey. I'm sorry. These latter shared one very crucial ideological tenet with Garvey. They too believed in race first, and therefore in separation of the races. Despite Garvey's limited agreements with some white persons, however, the insistent black nationalist thrust of the UNIA ensured the hostility of the majority of whites. One white lady witnessing a UNIA parade on 125th Street in Manhattan in 1920, is said to have tearfully exclaimed, "And to think, the Negroes will get their liberty before the Irish." Garvey's race-first doctrine was essentially a stratagem to ensure self-reliance and equality for the downtrodden African race. Unlike the white preachers of this doctrine with whom he collaborated, he did not go a step further and preach racial superiority. He more than once stressed that all beauty, virtue, and goodness are the exclusive attributes of no one race. All humanity have their shortcomings. Hence, no statement of mine at any time must be interpreted as a wholesale praise of or attack upon any race, people, or creed. Self-reliance was a necessary corollary to race first. In his earliest extant pamphlet, Garvey explained, in terms showing the probable influence of Booker T. Washington, that the Negro is ignored today simply because he has kept himself backward. But if he were to try to raise himself to a higher state in the civilized cosmos, all the other races would be glad to meet him on the plane of equality and comradeship. He went on to express an idea which would later cause him much enmity from Afro-American integrationists. It is indeed unfair to demand equality when one of himself has done nothing to establish the right to equality. Garvey never abandoned his dual tendency to score the white race for its injustice while simultaneously utilizing the language of condemnation to spur the black race on to greater self-reliance. Garvey's belief in the necessity for self-reliance led him occasionally to speak in the language of social Darwinism. He attacked the pseudoscientific racists who tried to justify genocide against the black people in terms of the Darwinian survival of the fittest, and turned their arguments to the cause of racial self-reliance. White philosophers, he argued, Darwin, Locke, Newton, and the rest, forgot that the monkey would change to a man. His tail would drop off and would demand his share. Not only had these philosophers been mistaken, but black heroism in World War I had finally given the lie to such false assumptions. He reminded his black audiences that that theory has been exploded in the World War. It was you, the Superman, that brought back victory at the Marne. The urgency Garvey felt for racial independence and self-reliance led him to argue that in independent endeavor lay the only hope of eventual solution to the problem of race prejudice. The white race would cease its aggressiveness towards the black when it was met by independent black power of magnitude equal to its own. White prejudice was manifested not because there is a difference between us in religion or in color, but because there is a difference between us in power. Furthermore, Garvey believed that the black man had little choice in the matter. If he did not continue going forward, spurred on by his own efforts, then he would slide backward into slavery and even extermination. The days of slavery are not gone forever, he reminded his followers. Slavery is threatened for every race and nation that remains weak and refuses to organize its strength for its own protection. Preach. The most important area for the exercise of independent effort was economic. Garvey believed, like Washington before him, that economics was primary. Successful political action could only be founded on an independent economic basis. After people have established successfully a firm industrial foundation, he wrote, they naturally turn to politics and society, but not first to society and politics because the two latter cannot exist without the former. Within a month of his arrival in the United States in 1916, Garvey was already appraising with approval the efforts of Afro-Americans have made in the economic field. At this early period, before he had made his decision to remain in the United States, he wrote, in a vein having prophetic implications for his own career, the acme of American Negro enterprise is not yet reached. You have still a far way to go. You want more stores, more banks, and bigger enterprises. I hope that your powerful Negro press and the conscientious element among your leaders will continue to inspire you to achieve. This desire for economic self-reliance dominated Garvey's thought. The fact that the black man was a consumer and not an independent producer worried him. Let Edison turn off his electric light, and we are in the darkness in Liberty Hall in 2 minutes, he once said. The Negro is living on borrowed goods. Garvey made a valiant attempt to change this rate of affairs. Between 1918 and the early 1920s, Garvey's headquarters area in New York City sprouted a large assortment of UNIA businesses. The Black Star Line was incorporated in 1919. The Negro Factories Corporation followed not long afterward. Negro Factories Corporation followed not long afterward. Under its aegis, AEGIS. There appeared Universal Laundries, a Universal Millinery Store, Universal Restaurants, Universal Grocery Stores, as well as a hotel, tailoring establishment, doll factory, and printing press. In addition, the UNIA in New York had by the first half of 1920 acquired 3 buildings, 1 lot and 2 trucks, and its weekly organ, the Negro World, was already well established. By 1920, also, Garvey was even contemplating a large bank. By 1920, more than 300 persons were employed by the UNIA and its allied corporations in the United States, and between 1920 and 1924, UNIA and allied employees on occasion exceeded 1,000 in the United States alone. The effort at self-reliance is well illustrated by the status of the Negro Factories Corporation in mid-1922. There were 3 grocery stores. Cooperative buying for all the stores and restaurants was done by one manager, thus keeping prices competitive with the white-owned enterprises which proliferated in Harlem. At Universal Grocery Store Number 1, which was at 47 West and 135th Street, the manager reported a minority of white customers. Grocery Store Number 2, 646 Lenox Avenue between 142nd and 143rd Streets, was reported to be doing all right, despite being surrounded by white competition. Store Number 3 at 552 Lenox Avenue and 138th Street was said to be the most flourishing of the 3. It included a meat, fish, and poultry market, said to be the only one of its kind in Harlem. It also boasted the first black butcher in Harlem. The groceries featured such foods as West Indian yams, pigeon peas, eddos, pumpkins, and plantains, and southwestern sweet potatoes and cane syrup. Universal Restaurant Number 1 was situated in Liberty Hall at 138th Street. Its seating capacity of 50 was being increased to 100. Miss Mary Lawrence, a food chemist and former hospital dietitian, presided over the food preparation. Restaurant Number 2 at 75th West Street, Restaurant Number 2 at 75 West 135th Street was smaller and still new and facing competition from 8 other eating places in the same block. The corporation's Beehive printing plant at 2305 7th Avenue was described as doing the bulk of Harlem's job in magazine printing. At 62 West 142nd Street was situated the corporation's Universal Mart of Industry, which housed a variety of enterprises. These included the Universal Steam and Electric Laundry, which employed 2 delivery trucks, the Men's Manufacturing Department, which made UNIA uniforms, insignia, and the like, and Women's Manufacturing Department and Bazaar, which made Black Cross nurses' uniforms, Panama hats, and other millinery, shirts, and ties. Plans were afoot for a universal catalog and mail order business, and indeed nurses' uniforms were already available on mail order basis. Presiding over the Negro Factories Corporation at that time, employing about 75 people, was Ulysses S. Poston, UNIA Minister of Industries and a former editor of the Black Detroit Contender. Because of his position, Poston found himself called upon to act as an unofficial advisor to Harlem business in general. During May 1922 alone, he reported, the UNIA Department of Labor and Industries have received at least 40 visits from Harlem businessmen who wanted the UNIA to bail them out. In addition to the parent body in Harlem, local branches of the UNIA owned considerable amounts of property and sometimes launched into local business ventures. The encouragement of local businesses was in fact a prime motive for the enterprises established in Harlem by Garvey. These efforts were often unsuccessful. In 1927, for example, after several years of financial assault on the organization and 2 years after Garvey's incarceration, his attorney stated that the organization still owned assets, usually real estate, valued at $20,000 in Philadelphia, $30,000 in Pittsburgh, $50,000 in Detroit, and $30,000 in Chicago, among other places. Local units outside the United States participated in such economic activity also. The Cologne, Panama UNIA, for example, ran a cooperative bakery, while the Kingston, Jamaica branch ran a laundry and an African Communities League People's Cooperative Bank, the shares of which were open only to UNIA members. The individual business enterprises established by UNIA branches all over the world were to be linked, according to Garvey's grand design, into a worldwide system of Pan-African economic cooperation. Such a trading community, when fully developed, will be so large that the economies of scales generated would enable it to thrive even in the face of hostility from the rest of the world. Garvey summed up this idea: Negro producers, Negro distributors, Negro consumers. The world of Negroes can be self-contained. We desire earnestly to deal with the rest of the world, but if the rest of the world desire not, we seek not. The Black Star Line was to be the carrier for this Pan-African trade. Garvey's attempts to establish economic self-reliance went beyond cooperative business enterprises, for UNIA branches acted as a mutual aid-friendly societies for the payment of death and other minor benefits to members. In rural areas among poor communities, this aspect of the organization's operations assumed greater importance. Local divisions also were required to maintain a charitable fund for the purpose of assisting distressed members or needy individuals of the race, a fund for loans of honor to active members, and an employment bureau to assist members seeking work. Economic self-reliance, especially on the American scene, acquired a special urgency for Garvey, for he foresaw a depression which he thought would finish the black man in America for good. The readjustment of the world, as I have often said, is going to bring about an economic industrial stagnation in America that is going to reduce the Negro to his last position in his nation. The UNIA quest for self-reliance led to sporadic attempts at educational facilities provided by the organization. Garvey's correspondence with Booker T. Washington and his visit to the United States were both motivated by a desire to establish in Jamaica an industrial and agricultural school along the lines of Washington's Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. This desire for an education geared toward independence continuously cropped up. The 1920 Declaration of Rights had demanded unlimited and unprejudiced education for black people, and UNIA locals in Port Limon, Costa Rica, Colon, Panama, British Guiana, and elsewhere ran elementary and sometimes grammar schools. One such school in Cologne was described 2 months after its inception in 1925 as being along cooperative lines with free tuition for members' children, with an enrollment of more than 300 and staffed by 5 British West Indian and 1 Panamanian teacher, the latter appointed to satisfy a government requirement for a Spanish-speaking teacher. In New York City, the association owned a Booker T. Washington University in the early years. In 1926, the Association of the United States obtained the Smallwood Quarry Industrial Institute in Claremont, Virginia, afterward renamed Liberty University. The school was reported to be on property adjoining the James River and containing a wharf where the second lot of slaves landed in Virginia in 1622. It was transferred to the UNIA in consideration for assuming its outstanding indebtedness. At the time of its transfer, the school's vice president, J. G. St. Clair Drake, was the UNIA's international organizer, while its principal, Khaled B. Robinson, was a member of the Philadelphia division. Liberty University was acquired amid high hopes that it would become a successful vehicle for imparting self-reliance and race pride and for rehabilitating black history. The university, like many other Afro-American colleges of the period, was in fact of high school standard, and it struggled on for 3 years before being closed in 1929 due to financial difficulty. Those students who did attend were often sponsored by the local UNIA units and were dedicated Garveyites. In addition to its formally organized schools, the UNIA throughout its history organized in-service training courses of various kinds. During Garvey's American period, for example, the organization carried out such programs for its civil servants, and ex-schoolmaster James O'Meally wrote a special guidebook for prospective UNIA officers. During Garvey's last years in London, he organized a school of African philosophy which, by means of correspondence courses as well as intensive courses administered by Garvey himself in Canada, prepared UNIA workers for their roles in the organization. The insistent UNIA thrust for self-reliance can be summarized in Garvey's own words. The Universal Negro Improvement Association teaches our race self-help and self-reliance, not only in one essential, but in all those things that contribute to human happiness and well-being. The disposition of the many to depend upon the other races for kindly and sympathetic consideration of their needs without making an effort to do for themselves has been the racist standing disgrace by which we have been judged and through which we have created the strongest prejudice against ourselves. The race needs workers at this time, not plagiarists, copyists, and mere imitators, but men and women who are able to create, to originate and improve, and thus make an independent racial contribution to the world and civilization. Peace.